A beautiful day in September. Arrived in Tel Aviv from Hong Kong last night. Stayed in the Metropole Hotel. I'm about to spend 2 weeks here, taking a coach tour with some good friends from the UK. We'll go through the Negev desert, visit the desert home of David Ben-Gurion, see the majestic Ramon crater, and visit Timna Park, where we'll not only see history, but an incredible replica of Moses' tabernacle in the wilderness. Today's destination is the Red Sea port of Eilat, getting a close-up look at the Negev desert, through which the children of Israel journeyed. First stop, the kibbutz Sde Boker, that became the desert home of David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister. Whilst on a trip to the town of Mitzpeh Ramon, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion observed a group of tents and simple buildings beside the road. He was told that a group of pioneer families had moved there to establish a settlement in the desert. After returning to Tel Aviv, he wrote to members of the kibbutz, "I was unable to stop being jealous and envious of you." After a meeting, they invited him to join them, and he did. Next stop, about halfway, to look at the formidable Ramon crater, where there's a lookout point that enables us to see the amazing views. This is indeed a holy site. It's one of the places where the Israelites would have passed, the wilderness of Paran. It's also where Hagar and Ishmael were exiled. The town of Kadesh Barnea is to the west, the Dead Sea to the northeast. The Ramon crater is actually a box canyon, not formed by a river, but by settling and erosion. The edges clearly seen. The depth is about 500 meters. The red and yellow clay creating a variety of colors. There is said to be only one spring in the whole area. It's quite unlike anything I'd ever seen before. There's a great visitor center with some interesting things to see. A fascinating and enjoyable visit. We then headed down to Eilat. Passing through the crater and enjoying another view of it. It had been a long but enjoyable day. Next morning we backtracked a little. We're visiting the ancient site of Timna, only 15 minutes from Eilat. An area rich in copper ore that's been mined for thousands of years and which many believe to be the location of King Solomon's mines, made famous by a 19th century novel which erroneously places the mines in Africa. But there's no proof that Solomon was ever here either. When we research the Old Testament, we find a reference to both the promise of God and the value of copper in Deuteronomy 8:7. For the Lord your God is bringing you to a good land, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. I believe this is malachite, a common copper ore. But there's another attraction here in the park that is amazing. It's a full-size model of Moses' tabernacle in the wilderness that holds great interest for both Jew and Christian. Erected in the desert, the creators have taken great pains in an attempt to faithfully replicate the tabernacle. The guide was excellent, not only giving the history, but also some great insights. The dimensions of this replica followed the biblical instructions given to Moses: the outer wall, the brazen altar, and laver. The tabernacle itself being created in the dimensions and colors specified to Moses, though not the exact materials. It's gold paint. To be in this location and hear the guide describe it was special. I was impressed that though our guide was Jewish, she also explained aspects of the tabernacle that were of interest to Christians. The outer court layout and the furniture inside have great significance. Inside is immaculate. The table of showbread, the golden lampstand, the golden altar of incense, the high priestly garments, having great significance. We even get to see inside the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant contained three things: a golden jar holding the manna, Aaron's rod which budded, and the tablets of the covenant on which are written the 10 Commandments. To be in the middle of the desert and observe this is eerie, like going back in time. In biblical times, the 12 tribes of Israel would have encamped around it. From there we went over to another part of the site where the so-called Solomon's Pillars are to be found. They are indeed majestic. The wilderness is home to many acacia bushes, which some believe to be a type of the burning bush. Clearly, the site was used millennia ago. This is the remains of an Egyptian temple dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of mining, who is also the goddess of the afterlife. It's been a fascinating visit, being able to experience truly ancient history, and not least seeing the Tabernacle replica. One of the great joys of the land of Israel is its diversity. One day we're in the modern metropolis of Tel Aviv, the next in the desert, and suddenly we're now on the shores of the Red Sea, enjoying the sand, the sea, and the sunshine. And in the case of this splendid city, the aquatic life, be it at the Eilat Coral Beach Nature Reserve or the extraordinary underwater observatory park, a chance to see what lies beneath. Colorful. The fish are not in a tank, we are. Thus we observe the fish in their natural habitat. These creatures are actually swimming around us in the sea. There's even a submarine if you want more. Pristine ocean. Very enjoyable. Another great day. Back to the hotel for dinner. Next day will be special. We'll explore the Red Sea. We're taking a boat trip on this friendly vessel, where we will not only be able to take in the history of the place, but also the amazing location: Israel to the north, Jordan and Saudi Arabia to the east, and Egypt to the west. One can see 4 nations from Eilat. This is the Gulf of Aqaba at the northern end of the Red Sea, the sea where the miracle of Moses and the children of Israel crossing on dry land occurred, though not in this location. Before us, the hills of Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Behind us, Eilat, where the Bible says King Solomon built a fleet of ships. It's also where the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king in the room of his father Amaziah. He rebuilt Eilat and restored it to Judah after his father's death. In addition to soaking in geography and history, so to speak, we also soaked in the ambience of the place. Ahead, the border between Egypt and Israel. The hotel on the left is in Egypt. There's a casino in there. The border has 11 palm trees outside. Time to swim in the Red Sea. Great fun. Then back to Eilat. After filming my friends, I actually swam around myself for over an hour and distinctly remember a school of barracuda swimming past me. An awesome sight. Grateful they weren't hungry. It was a delightful interlude. Eilat is a little crazy at night, so we had an evening stroll to enjoy the sights. I resisted the temptation to fly. I was afraid I might lose something on the way up. my dinner. This delightful lady provided our slow peas.
Good.
My good friends having fun. As were most people, a great family atmosphere. We've left Eilat and are on our way to legendary Masada, the fortress, an ancient fortification in the Negev desert, overlooking the Dead Sea that rises over 1,000 feet from the surrounding land and is one of Israel's most popular tourist attractions, and one which has great significance both in Jewish history and culture. There are two ways to ascend: the snake path, a dusty track for the adventurous with time on their hands, and a comfortable cable car that not only provides spectacular views over the Dead Sea and surrounding desert, but also takes less than 5 minutes. That's the snake path below, and clearly it's not very popular. It's not named because there are many snakes there, but because, as is clearly visible, it snakes its way up. Quite apart from the fortress itself, the experience of the cable car ride and the amazing views alone is worth the visit. The legend is intriguing. Even before the fall of Jerusalem to the Romans, the Caesarea rebels, literally the dagger men, came here, overpowering the small Roman encampment. But after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, it became the last bastion of Jewish resistance to Roman rule. Thus, after Jerusalem fell, the Roman army and an entourage of almost 10,000 came here and surrounded the rebels, their camps still visible. There were said to be 967 rebels, including many women and children. The Romans finally ended the siege by building a siege ramp on the western side where the cliffs were not so high. The 8 Roman camps that surrounded Masada can still be seen. According to Josephus Flavius, the siege of Masada ended in the mass suicide of 960 people, the Caesarea rebels and their families. There's much controversy about this account, as only 28 bodies were found. So how did they do it? The men first killed their wives and children, and then drew lots, and 10 men killed all the others. Then the 10 men drew lots, and 1 man killed the other 9, and then committed suicide. Thus there was only 1 person who actually killed himself. How come there were buildings here to begin with? Well, Masada was the first site which Herod the Great fortified after he gained control of the kingdom. He was apparently neurotic about being killed by his enemies. He began building in 35 BC. The complex was like a small city atop a mountain. Remains can still be seen. Storehouses, bathhouses, all elaborately and intricately decorated. Parts of the decoration amazingly still visible. Here we're literally walking through history. This is the Beth house or Caldarium. A model shows what it would have been like, but the ruins of it remain 2,000 years old, the paint still on the walls. The way they set it up was to place the floor on columns and have a furnace heating the underfloor. Outside there are many storehouses, as this was a very remote location. A bronze model shows the northern palace. Below, the ruins of it. The stadium opposite was built for Israel's 40th anniversary, when the main celebration was held here. The synagogue here has a very special significance. It's said to be the oldest Jewish synagogue in the world. Josephus mentions it in his account of the siege of Masada, which means it actually outlived the temple in Jerusalem by 3 years. These columns would have supported the ceiling. An interesting fact is that when it was excavated, 2 chapters of the scriptures, Ezekiel 38 and 39, the prophecy of the dry bones coming to life, were found buried under the floor. Prophecy that the nation of Israel would be reborn. So it's time to move on. Qumran and the Dead Sea await us. Our next destination just north of Masada was Qumran, an ancient settlement, but also the location of a cave in which the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. This is the cave. In late 1946, early 1947, a Bedouin shepherd was looking after his sheep and throwing pebbles into the entrance of a cave when he heard the sound of pottery. He climbed up and looked inside the cave to discover what are now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are over 2,000 years old. They were probably hidden at the time of the Roman sieges. The caves being in close proximity to the settlement. The scrolls are ancient, some dating back to the 3rd century before Christ. They were eventually sold to an antique dealer for 7 Jordanian pounds, at that time $28 US. They are actually priceless and are now housed in the Shrine of the Book in the grounds of the Israel Museum. The remains of the settlement can clearly be seen. It's a popular tourist destination. The dry climate here preserving the ruins. Here the walls of the pottery storeroom and kitchen. Next to it the refectory where they would dine. And the water cistern. I've actually seen the rain fall on these hills and gush like a torrent down to the Dead Sea. It's been known to wash cars into the sea as it cascades down off the hills. When that happened, the cisterns would be filled. Thus the community were able to survive in this barren desert. The historical and religious significance of the scrolls is because they include the 2nd oldest known surviving manuscripts of books included in both the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament. This is the scriptorium, where the scrolls would be kept, and some were even found here. The gateway to the scriptorium has stones that resemble those of the temple, though much smaller. The Qumran sect, believed by some to be the Essenes, lived here and diligently studied the books of the Bible and also copied them. A reconstruction shows what it was like. Brick benches and tables were found here. Also found here were hundreds of pottery lamps that would burn olive oil. Next to it, a ritual bath where they would be ceremoniously cleansed. A fascinating visit to this ancient historic site. From there we went a couple of miles away to the Dead Sea and the lowest land elevation on Earth at 1,412 feet below sea level. The actual Dead Sea is a further 997 feet deep, though it is receding at a swift rate. It contains a great variety of minerals and is said to be good for the skin, so everyone gets a good coating of mud. some more than others. Its salinity is 34.2%, thus making it very easy in which to float. Thus the tourists do their thing, being careful not to put their heads under the water and keeping the water away from eyes and mouth. So everyone had fun. Sometimes people bring a book to read as they float. It's a strange experience. Next stop, Jerusalem. Today we shall travel from Jerusalem to visit Bethlehem. Unfortunately, a high wall now separates Bethlehem from Jerusalem. Continual terrorist attacks have called for drastic measures. Our plan is to visit the birthplace of Jesus. And the first port of call is what is traditionally the shepherd's field, where the angels appeared to shepherds to herald the birth of Christ. Bethlehem is the city of David, where David lived and was himself a shepherd. Now a monastery stands to commemorate the site. When the site was excavated, evidence was uncovered of a large monastic establishment dating back to the 5th century. It is unlikely that this is the exact place where the angels proclaimed the birth of Christ. The Old Testament prophesied the announcement would be given at the Migdal Eder, the Tower of the Flock, but this has never been located. So this location is simply a pilgrimage site that may be close to where it happened. For Christians, a special place. Glory to God in the highest, and peace to all people was the message. The name Bethlehem meaning the house of bread, Jesus being the bread that came down from heaven. Though there are always crowds of people here, it is possible to find a peaceful place to reflect and meditate. So this is where it all started, the first Christmas. The words of the Bible? Now there were in the same country shepherds living out in the fields, watching over their flock by night. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were greatly afraid. Then the angel said to them, "Don't be afraid, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which will be to all people. For there is born to you this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." Traditional paintings remind pilgrims of what happened. From there we traveled to Bethlehem, Manger Square and the Church of the Nativity, built right over the place where Jesus is said to have been born. The grotto is the oldest site used as a place of worship in Christianity, and the basilica is the oldest major church in the Holy Land. It's right in the center of the city. Originally commissioned by Constantine the Great, a short time after his mother Helena's visit to Jerusalem and Bethlehem in 325 and 326. It was dedicated on the 31st of May 339. The ancient mosaic floor uncovered for visitors to see. The 11th century mosaics on the walls being largely covered in gold. The grotto is in a cave below the church. As with many ancient sites, it's difficult to prove that this was the exact place where Jesus was born. But early Christians began to revere this place from the 1st century. It is indeed a very simple place. The Catholic Church of St. Catherine and the monastery above being very beautiful. Outside the church, a statue of St. Jerome, who translated the Bible into Latin, the Vulgate. For pilgrims, places like this are places to reflect. Jerusalem has to be the most iconic, exciting, historic, and certainly emotive city in the world. Our first visit is the Holocaust History Museum, Yad Vashem, literally meaning a monument and a name. Understandably, filming inside is not permitted, as it contains images of individuals in extermination camps. Though it's not a usual tourist destination, it's nevertheless a place all visitors should see. An amazing experience that occupies over 4,200 square meters, mainly underground. In the Hall of Names, the actual names of the victims are memorialized. One of Yad Vashem's tasks is to honor non-Jews who risked their lives, liberty, or positions to save Jews during the Holocaust, such as Oskar Schindler, about whom the film Schindler's List was produced. their names commemorated in the Garden of the Righteous among the Nations on the Mount of Remembrance. From there we drove to the old city of Jerusalem to be greeted by those ancient walls. And even to this day, this is perhaps the most iconic city in the world, revered by 3 of the major religions, and visited by countless pilgrims over the centuries. We entered Zion Gate and were immediately confronted by the Roman Cardo, perhaps the most remarkable feature of the old city. The ancient Roman street runs from north to south, a common feature of Roman cities. The Wailing Wall, the western wall of Herod's temple, the holiest, most revered location of Jews. Coming here to pray, to contemplate, and to worship. Then a visit to the ancient Temple Mount, where the great temples of Solomon and Herod were situated. Solomon's temple was unique amongst ancient temples in that it did not have idols. Within Solomon's temple, the Holy of Holies, instead of an idol, was the Ark of the Covenant. For the first time, the law of God, not an idol, was enshrined. The first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in December 589 BC. The second temple by the Romans in 70 AD. The first Muslims invaded in 636 AD, 4 years after the death of Muhammad. The iconic Dome of the Rock was built in AD 692. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, the farthest mosque, built in 705 AD, making the journey of Muhammad to Jerusalem in 621 AD difficult to understand, as the mosque was not built until after his death. Islamic art, prominent and beautiful. One of the joys of the Holy Land is the amazing weather. I've seldom been here when it wasn't sunny and warm, though I've seen pictures of Jerusalem in the snow and always wish I could have been here to film that. We then walked to St. Stephen's Gate, also called the Sheep Gate, to visit the Pool of Bethesda, a biblical location right in the heart of the old city. It's a Christian site where Jesus healed a sick man. Bethesda means house of mercy. The ruins of these pools are extensive and again take us back 2,000 years or more. Now a ruin, It must have been magnificent in times past. According to the Bible, it was a swimming pool with 5 porticos, some of which can still be seen. Jesus healed a sick man here. This is the place where it's said to have happened. Some of the buildings here are remarkably well preserved. It's a fascinating place to visit. As a historical site, it must be one of the most significant in Jerusalem. I love to linger in places like this. What did it look like 2,000 years ago? And what was going on? Merv was giving some insights. Right next to it is the Church of St. Anne, who was the mother of the Virgin Mary, still a place that pilgrims visit. Our tour group offering a hymn. Beautiful singing and very moving. For some reason it was spared when the Muslim invaders arrived. Some say it was because Arab Christians had written an Arabic inscription over the door. Right in the center of the holy city, a piece of history that transported us back in time 2,000 years. A very enjoyable visit. Then we walked over to the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall of prayer for Jews. Formerly the Western Wall of Herod's Temple and the most holy site of Jews today. They don their prayer shawls and come here to pray, just as Jesus did 2,000 years ago. Perhaps he also wore his shawl and tefillin as they do here. Their prayer requests often written down and thrust between the crevices of the walls. The temple was the place where God dwelt amongst his people in the Holy of Holies. It is thus for Jews the place on earth that is nearest to the heart of God. Right next to the wall, a synagogue that we visited. The wall of the synagogue being a continuation of the Western Wall. Jews today believe that though the temple was destroyed, God still dwells here in the midst of his people. We then walked across to the Jerusalem Archaeological Park that was nearby. Jerusalem has perhaps the richest history of any place on earth. This part is located on the southern side of Temple Mount, where worshippers would have entered the temple. The park gives us an opportunity to get close to the original wall of the temple. Robinson's Arch is the name given to a staircase supported by a wide stone arch. It carried traffic up from ancient Jerusalem's lower market up to Temple Mount. The bridge is described by Josephus, and its existence proves the antiquity of the temple. The road here is also an ancient road. It was a very long street running from north to south that ran through what is called the Valley of the Cheesemakers. It ran parallel to the western wall of the Temple Mount. It's also at the level of Jerusalem at that time, and is therefore an authentic place where Jesus would have walked in antiquity. For the pilgrim, a very meaningful place. This is the southwestern corner of Temple Mount, and here the size of the stones can clearly be seen. The stone here is estimated to weigh 210 tons. The smallest stone is said to weigh 2.5 tons. A ram's horn, or shofar, was blown as the sun set on Friday afternoon to allow the people to know when the Sabbath begins. The Hebrew here says, "to the place of trumpeting." The staircase here leading to the southern entrance of the Temple Mount. The steps leading to the entrances here, where the Jews would enter the temple. Again, a place where Jesus would have walked as he entered the temple. We then walked out of Zion Gate to Mount Zion, where there are two significant religious sites: the tomb of King David and the upper room where the Last Supper was held. It's doubtful that either of these two places are authentic, but traditionally they are revered. King David's tomb is situated on the ground floor in the corner of the remains of the former Hagia Zion, a church of the late Roman era. Josephus mentions the tomb and that Herod the Great had tried to loot it, but discovered that someone else had already done so before him. So it's clear the location was known at that time, though the majority of historians do not consider the site to be authentic. The contents of the sarcophagus have not yet been analyzed to determine their age, or even whether there is actually still a corpse there. Likewise, the upper room was actually not built at the time of Jesus, so it's simply a devotional location on what is believed to be the site of the upper room. The actual Zion Gate still bears the bullet marks of the 1948 War of Independence. Our next stop was the Jewish Quarter, a beautiful part of Jerusalem, quite unlike the hustle-bustle of the Muslim Quarter. Fewer shops, more a residential area. My favorite falafel cafe is here. It always brings back memories. Next to it, the remains of the Cardo, the north-south main street of the city that the Romans built after they had destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. We then get to see the remains of the walls that Nehemiah rebuilt 2,500 years ago, when everybody joined in, and they actually rebuilt it in 52 days, though they are smaller than the walls of today. Next to them, the remains of the Cardo. Next to that, a shopping arcade built over where the Cardo used to be. Clearly, we're still in the Jewish Quarter. As we emerge at the southern end, more remains of this Roman street. History is ingrained in this city. Two-thousand-year-old shops here, and we get to walk through it. The Mount of Olives in the distance, the Seven Arches Hotel, a hillside of Jewish graves. And as we walk to the western wall, a golden menorah, the symbol of Israel, bringing God's light to the nations. Below the western wall of the temple, and the Islamic Dome of the Rock. The Mount of Olives overlooks Jerusalem from the east. I still clearly remember the first time I encountered this legendary city, and this was my first glimpse of it. In 1985, we'd flown from Hong Kong to Amman in Jordan, and after a few days there took a taxi to Allenby Bridge and crossed into Israel. Then another taxi past Jericho up to Jerusalem, this being our first view as we passed Bethany and arrived at the Mount of Olives. It's a fascinating place overlooking the city, and as we arrive, bathed in the morning sunshine, the golden dome of the rock reflecting the sun. Opposite, the eastern gate of Jerusalem, known as the Golden Gate, where Ezekiel prophesied the Messiah will enter Jerusalem. In Christian tradition, the gate is the scene of the meeting between Anne and Joachim, the parents of Mary, and some believe it's where Jesus entered on Palm Sunday. The Jewish cemetery here is the most ancient and most important in Jerusalem. Burial here started about 3,000 years ago in the days of the first temple and continues to this day. The cemetery, thought to contain over 70,000 tombs from various periods, including the tombs of some well-known Jews. The small stones placed on the tombs has become a way of honoring the dead. The church here, the Dominus Flavit, meaning the Lord wept. It is a reference to Jesus weeping over the plight of Jerusalem, built to resemble a teardrop by the Franciscans. It looks over the old city of Jerusalem, the golden cupolas of the Russian Orthodox Church of Mary Magdalene close by. The southeast corner of Temple Mount is believed to be the location of the pinnacle of the temple where Jesus was tempted. Olive trees still abundant here. The Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed before his death. Gethsemane meaning the oil press. Some of the trees here dated as being almost 1,000 years old. Olives still growing. I'm always intrigued that when Jesus prayed here, he prayed 3 times, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." He's asking, is there any other way by which mankind can be saved? Do I have to die this terrible death? I've often heard people say there are many ways to God, but if that was so, why would God have to allow his Son to die in such a way when there were other ways? Clearly that is not the case. There's only one way, and Jesus clearly stated that fact in his teaching. Next time, another beguiling visit, this time to the Church of St. Peter Gallicantu, the crowing cock on Mount Zion, built on the site of the house of Caiaphas, where Jesus spent his last hours before his crucifixion. Our next visit is another significant biblical site, the Roman Catholic Church of St. Peter Gallicantu, on the eastern slope of Mount Zion, not far from Zion Gate. Its name is Latin, meaning the cock's crowing, and it's named because the church is built upon what is believed to be the site of the house of Caiaphas, where Jesus was taken up these steps after his arrest. This is the path that connected the old city of Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives, where Jesus was betrayed by Judas Iscariot and arrested. Thus Jesus was taken down into the Kidron Valley and up to the house of Caiaphas, perhaps up these very steps. Is this the true location? The ruins of the tithe vats can be seen from here. Artifacts discovered include a complete set of weights and measures used by the priests in the temple, and a door lintel with the word korban, a sacrificial offering, written in Hebrew. Also, according to the pilgrim of Bordeaux, who wrote of his journey in 333 AD, quote, "On this side, one goes up to Zion and sees where the house of Caiaphas the priest once stood, and there still stands a column against which Christ was beaten with rods." It's a beautiful church. I still remember the first time I visited the vaults below the church, where Bordeaux's pilgrims saw the place where Jesus was beaten, and I was awestruck at seeing where prisoners' hands were tied and where they would be beaten. There is just this one place which begs the question, were the hands of Jesus pushed through these holes? At each side below, containers, which are said to have contained salt and olive oil. The whole complex hewn out of rock. Then the pit, thought to be where Jesus was detained for the night following his arrest. Now a stairway has been built down into it, known today as Christ's prison. Previously, the only access to the bottlenecked cistern was through a shaft from above, through which the prisoner would be lowered and raised by means of a rope. There's actually a mosaic depicting this on the wall of the church. From the terrace outside can be seen the potter's field, the field of blood, Akeldama, where Judas killed himself, and of which it was prophesied in Psalm 69 that it would forever be desolate, and clearly it still is. Great views over Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives. We then walked back into the city and had a look at the Jaffa Gate. Jerusalem, probably more than any place on earth, having the powerful aura of history and intrigue. The actual gate is interesting, and some have said the eye of the needle was the nickname for the small gate within the gate, which opened after the main gate was closed at night. When Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God, he was referring to the difficulty encountered trying to get a camel through the smaller gate. All its baggage would have to be removed. And though there's no record of it being called the eye of the needle in Jesus' day, it's nevertheless intriguing, as Jesus always taught using examples from everyday life that illustrated the message. Was it just hyperbole, or is there some truth in it? Jaffa Gate always brings back memories for me, especially our second visit in 1986, when we actually stayed with a friend in the old city near to Christchurch. It has its own charm, beginning with the architecture. Every time I pass here, I fondly remember our time here when the kids were small. It's a strategic place to enter Jerusalem and explore. All 4 quarters of Jerusalem within easy reach. Without doubt, it's my favorite gate, and whichever way one walks from here provides insights into the old city. And a fascinating glimpse of life into Jerusalem today. There's even an old photo displayed here, showing that it's changed little in recent times. The bookshop at Christchurch was also interesting, with a model of Moses' tabernacle. We were also shown a tunnel that went below the shop and ran underneath the city toward Temple Mount. We then walked through the Armenian Quarter, the tall alleyways and arches unlike any other city that I've seen. Three Jewish guys gave my shot an authentic look, and when we chatted, they told me they were from Brooklyn, New York.
So here's our
Welcome
wonderful.
to Jerusalem.
These are 3 Jewish guys from Brooklyn.
These alleyways are actually not on the beaten tourist track, but for me, a must-walk-through place, memorable. I've walked through here 100 times with the kids when they were little. Walking to the Falafel Cafe near Zion Gate to have lunch. We're about to enter the Jewish quarter. Next, the Jewish quarter. You'll notice the music Nabucco or Nebuchadnezzar by Verdi. Chorus of the Hebrew slaves. Beautiful music that reminds us that ever since King David bought the threshing floor of Jerusalem thousands of years ago, enemies have sought to conquer it. Persians, Babylonians, Greeks, Romans, Ottomans, Muslims, and Philistines. The Hebrew for Philistine, by the way, is Palestine, a name bestowed upon Judea by Roman Emperor Hadrian, who sought to punish the Jews by calling it by the name of their bitter enemies from Gaza, who worshipped the god Pales. The small cafe selling falafel is my favorite eating place here. And I did just that with twins Paul and David. You see their likeness. After which we explored the nearby Roman Cardo. Cardo was the Latin name given to the north-south street in ancient Roman cities, and Latin, as you can guess, meaning heart, where we may wine and dine. It's actually a mix of old and new, the new often resembling the old more than the old resembles the old. The street in part becomes a tunnel with shops either side, mainly of the tourist variety. Well, what do we have here? They're looking into it. We then continued into the Muslim quarter. Again, tourist shops predominate. Always an interesting stroll. The things you see on sale are simply the things that sell to tourists, that is. As usual, having a chat with everybody. Love the spices. The shops very photogenic and do communicate the feel of the place. Some shops and restaurants clearly dating back centuries. You will see the noticeable absence of women. Here the shops mainly manned by men, though some women are shopping. The alleyways particularly fascinating. Insights into life here. Kids playing. Jerusalem, the evening light, mysterious. Every now and then, I just stop and stare, reflect a little. There's always an air of history and intrigue. I want to ask the walls questions about what they've witnessed. Today, diversity, an intriguing mix of life and living. But it's time to have a sit and a coffee.
So we now have
then a walk back to the King Solomon Hotel. It's been a fascinating day. Our journey through history continues with a visit to two amazing sites. The first is the Shrine of the Book, which houses the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in Qumran by a shepherd boy in late 1946, early 1947. They contain parts of all but one of the books of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and amazingly the only ancient copy of the Ten Commandments. Nearby, a model of Jerusalem during the time of Christ, reconstructed using information from the Bible and the writings of Josephus Flavius. It's fascinating and has clearly changed much. It's a 1:50 scale model of Jerusalem in the late Temple period. The model, measuring 2,000 square meters, was originally at the Holy Land Hotel. I remember seeing it there on my first visit. In 2006, the model was moved to its present location, at that time being sawn into 100 pieces and reassembled. The red roofs being where the nobility resided, close to the temple. The Golden Gate on the eastern side, the Gate Beautiful, also facing east. Though it's impossible from information available to create a totally authentic model, it is nevertheless fascinating to see. Within the city walls, many houses for the residents of the city. Protected within its walls. The city of David. The entrances to the temple. Gates in and out. Clearly an impressive city, not least the temple. An intriguing visit. One of the most important sites for Christians in Jerusalem is the Garden Tomb. The organization that maintains it does not claim that this is the authentic tomb of Jesus, but rather that it is similar to the site described in the Bible and gives insight into what the original tomb would have looked like. Golgotha means the place of the skull, and the limestone here in modern times certainly resembles a skull, though it's certainly changed in the last 2,000 years. The garden is thus a special place to visit, to reflect, to soak in history. And the guides here are excellent and give both historical and biblical insights. The tomb here is dated to the 7th or 8th century BC. It would have been reused many times. The Bible states the actual tomb of Jesus was new. It is nevertheless an inspiring place to visit. After a period of time, the bones would be removed to a different location. There are some interesting relics here. This is a 1st century wine press. The grapes would be placed in the upper part and trampled. The juice would run into a large wineskin placed below. Stones like these were rolled across the entrances of the tombs, and clearly it would take 2 or 3 people to roll one away. I then got the opportunity to survey Jerusalem from above. Nowadays it stretches far beyond the old city, the red roofs here being Mir Sherim, the home of the Hasidic Jews. Here Mount Scopus in the distance, and in the distance here, the hills of Bethlehem. We then drove over to Montefiores to get another view of the city. This time overlooking the Jaffa Gate and the Citadel of David. And Mount Zion. The old Intercontinental Hotel, now the 7 Arches on the Mount of Olives. The Dome of the Rock, built over the place where Abraham took Isaac to sacrifice him. God intervened and provided a lamb, prompting John the Baptist to say, "Behold the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world." As evening falls, we visit the renowned Ben Yehuda Street, considered the secular heart of Jerusalem, that especially comes to life as the sun sets on the Jewish Sabbath. Then back to the King Solomon Hotel, and in the lobby, the sculpture of the city of Jerusalem in the form of a sphere, known as the navel of the world. Our stay in Jerusalem is now at an end. Tomorrow we'll go north into Galilee. Leaving Jerusalem on our way to Beth-Shean in the Galilee, traveling the road from Jerusalem to Jericho to begin with, then up the Jordan Valley toward Galilee. Beth-Shean is now a national park. When we arrive and look over the ruins, I'm indeed taken back 2,000 years. Though my first glimpse of it instantly reminded me of our family visit to Amman in Jordan in the 80s, when we visited the ruins of another of the cities of the Decapolis, Jerash, north of Amman. The model at the entrance showing what it would have looked like in its prime. It was a major city of the Roman Decapolis, the 10 cities, and there's an amphitheater, a hippodrome, Roman baths, even shops, and an agora, an open marketplace. The restoration is impressive, and it's a pleasure to walk around, soaking in history. In Hebrew, Bet means house, and Shean means rest. But this city's 6,000-year-old history of conquests, wars, and earthquakes certainly makes us question the name. It's not exactly been a house of rest. Not only is this a Roman historical site, but it also featured in biblical history. In the year 1004 BC, at nearby Mount Gilboa, the Philistines attacked Israel, and King Saul, together with 3 of his sons, died in battle. Then, according to the Bible in 1 Samuel 31, they fastened his body to the wall of Bet Shean on top of this tell. It was part of Manasseh's share of the land during Joshua's time. The location is ideal for a city, with all important springs nearby, and also the River Jordan to the east. Located along the famous trade route, the Via Maris, and only 17 miles from the Sea of Galilee. When the Romans rebuilt the city, they didn't build it on the ruins of the tell of the old city, but below it. The amphitheater is said to have accommodated 7,000. Only the lowermost tier of seating, out of 3, survives intact. Nowadays, about 2,000 seats are still there. The acoustics in these theaters was phenomenal. Somebody standing on the stage could clearly be heard throughout the theater. This was here, intact, at the time of Jesus, and was actually on the way to Jerusalem from Galilee. Perhaps a group of 13 once walked this way. The Bible in Matthew 4:25 even mentions that people from here followed Jesus, and in later years it became a Christian center with many churches here. The tell in the distance, the Cardo, Palladium Road, surrounded by columns. This was the heart of the city. It is imposing, grandiose, monumental. What occasions this place must have hosted, as thousands walked through these gates and sat in these seats, marveling at the spectacles below. The Romans loved spectacles, and the chance to escape reality for a few hours was a distraction from everyday life. The live entertainment history thus was huge in Roman culture, and the shows would have employed horses, animals, musicians, singers and dancers, as well as the gladiators and bloody spectacles, which to us today cause revulsion. I suppose in modern times, people go to cinemas and watch similar bloodthirsty events, sex and violence, killing, cruelty, etc. Are these the equivalent of ancient cinema seats? Here's the foyer. Elaborate, striking architecture and spectacles was also Rome's way of showing off to their conquered regions how advanced and civilized they were. This was the centerpiece. It's impressive, and we can see close up the amazing building techniques. This is a special VIP box. We then strolled up the Cardo, a name derived from Greek cardia, the heart. It was generally lined with shops and vendors and was the hub of economic life. It would be on a north-south direction. The Agra, the open marketplace, and shops lined the Cardo. The Agra was not just a place for shopping, but a meeting place where debates would have taken place. Though destroyed by an earthquake in the 8th century, it's slowly being restored. And some restoration gives insight into what it would have looked like 2,000 years ago. So we walked up the Cardo, the marketplace alongside. These are the remains of the shops. High Street Bet Shean. There would have been 1 or 2 columns inside to support the roof. The mosaics on the Cardo still intact. More shops. Back in the day, this would have been a hive of activity. Restoration takes time, and great care is taken to be authentic and accurate. But seeing the state of the ruins is nevertheless fascinating. To see ruins as they were discovered is also interesting. Untouched for centuries, all having a story to tell. Here perhaps some storage vats. I wonder what they contained. The bathhouse. The bathhouse was not just a place for bathing, but socializing as well. The water would be heated by fire and then channeled into the caldarium, the hot bathing room. A wooden floor would be laid above these supports, and the steam would rise into the room. When asked by a foreigner why he bathed once a day, a Roman emperor is said to have replied, "Because I don't have time to bathe twice a day." Cartoons here depict life in the bathhouse. It was a place to chat and discuss. But political views and ideas were also shared. One could get a manicure and a haircut. Even a massage. Many accessories were discovered here. Nearby, some interesting mosaics. one depicting the sacrifice of Isaac and signs of the zodiac. The synagogue here is recognized as a Samaritan synagogue because of the mosaic. Indeed, an intriguing visit. We then moved on to another biblical site. We then continued north on the slopes of Mount Gilboa and encountered the largest swimming pool in Israel that is fed by a spring that flows out of a cave, Ein Harod. Peaceful today, but in former times known as a battlefield and the location of one of the Bible's most well-known battles, that of Gideon and his strange army in an event that happened more than 3,000 years ago. This is the stream where Gideon chose his 300 warriors to battle the Midianites. The warriors were chosen based on how they drank the water. Those who lapped the water like dogs were left behind. The 300 warriors who drank with a cupped hand went on to immortality. So I sipped from the same waters that Gideon's men drank from so long ago, though unfortunately we didn't have time to swim in the pool. Then on to Galilee, overlooking the Jezreel Valley, another location where biblical events took place and where the final battle of Armageddon will happen. A beautiful fertile valley through which the Jordan River flows. Many kibbutzim, communal Israeli farms, are here. Beyond the lake, the Golan Heights, and beyond that is Syria. Here's sea level. Galilee is 216 meters below sea level, 709 feet, the lowest freshwater lake on Earth and the second lowest lake in the world after the saltwater Dead Sea. Soon arriving in Tiberius, in the beginning considered as a pagan and unclean city. It was built as a resort for the Roman aristocracy, and Jesus avoided this town. We then arrived at the Ron Beach Hotel, and I had a great room overlooking Galilee, my home for the next few days. Next morning we're off north to the ancient city of Dan, along the shores of Galilee. A city from the time of Jeroboam in the 9th century BC. 3,700 years ago it was a Canaanite city called Laish, at the foot of Mount Hermon. I remember my very first visit here, and how I was impressed by the place, especially the fast-flowing narrow river and abundance of water in the area. The river is only about 12 miles long before it reaches the Jordan, but it's prolific, providing up to 238 million cubic meters of water a year to the Hula Valley. The area is now called the Tel Dan Nature Reserve and is certainly impressive. I've never seen any other place in Israel quite like it. So well known was Dan in times past that the extent of Israel was from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south. It's certainly a serene, quiet, natural place that was thoroughly enjoyable to walk around. A remarkable thing is that the city walls, gates, and some other ruins are still recognizable. The tribe of Dan came here to fight against what was called Leshem. Dan meaning to judge, but later King Rehoboam strayed from worshipping God and made 2 golden calves, one in Bethel and the other here in Dan. It was a political move to stay in power. Here an altar is still intact. This is one of the gates to the city. The gates of the city were where leaders met and made their plans, which helps us to understand the phrase, "The gates of hell shall not prevail." The gates of hell being where the plans of the devil are made. Here's the king's throne in the gate. What was to be the most intriguing ruin is that of the Canaanite gate, called the Gate of the 3 Arches, as there were 2 more arches inside the first that have not survived intact. The original arch is still clear. This is one of the oldest gates ever discovered and may well be the gate described in Genesis 14:14 in the Bible, where it states, "Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants, who were born in his own house, and went in pursuit as far as Dan." Some have speculated that Abraham would thus have walked through this gate, as it was already built at that time, and it's come to be known as Abraham's Gate. In the Holy Land, we get used to walking in some places and told Jesus would have walked there. But here, it's possible that Abraham walked. I have to say, that's a wow moment. Abraham walked through this gate. In the distance, Nimrod Castle, built by the marauding Muslims. Next stop, about 5 miles from Dan, is Banias, the Caesarea Philippi of the Bible, about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, and at the base of Mount Hermon. That's the location of one of the largest springs that feeds the Jordan River, and that made it a popular place in times past. Many temples were built here in the Hellenistic and Roman periods, and at that time it was named Panias after the Greek god Pan, who was worshipped here. Pan, half man, half goat, was the god of fear, from where we get the English word panic, and is often depicted playing the flute. His father was Hermes. The spring that emerged from the large cave became the center of pagan worship. It still flows out. It's now the Herman Stream Nature Reserve, and is indeed another pleasant place to stroll around and admire the scenery. The niches that held their gods still here. We know from depictions on coins that in times past, offerings were placed in them. Other offerings fearfully cast into the cave, even human sacrifices. Today it's a popular tourist destination, mainly because of its Christian significance. In Matthew 16, Jesus comes into the region of Caesarea Philippi and asks his disciples, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, "Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He then asked them, "Who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answers and says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Perhaps they're sitting here having a drink when it happened. It is thus a place for Christians to reflect. My friend David doing just that. Clearly, however, he would never have made it into Gideon's army. So another deeply significant biblical location that is very special to be able to visit. So on we go. Next stop, the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is the high plateau above Galilee, originally a part of Syria that was forfeited when Syria illegally attacked Israel in 1973. And Israel not only resisted the attack, but captured the Golan Heights. Unfortunately, many mines illegally deployed by the Syrian army remain active. Syria showing little respect for both international law and human life. There have been 108 fatalities as a result. We then headed back to the Rom Beach Hotel. Many times I've stated my love for this hotel. It's undoubtedly my favorite hotel in all the world. Delightful rooms overlooking Galilee, from where we enjoy the evening sun and the morning sunrise. Sit on an artificial beach and take in the amazing scene. Soak in history. Enjoy the sights. And nature and birdsong. And have fun with members of our tour group whose likeness to the ancestors of evolutionists clearly seen as we relax after another excellent Ron Beach dinner. Then a 10-minute stroll into nearby Tiberius, the great mosque. It was a quiet night, and we just had a stroll, though there are many great places to eat and some interesting places to see. A few tourist shops open. Buggy ride available. A very pleasant September evening.
You gotta move, it's a movie.
So we had a drink and looked around the shops. After a day's sightseeing, it's always good to enjoy a relaxing evening. And watch the moon rise over Galilee. The sun has just emerged on another peaceful day in the Galilee. And we're enjoying both the ambience and the views from the Ron Beach Hotel. Today we shall visit another biblical site, that of the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter, a Franciscan church located in Tabga. It commemorates and historically marks the spot where Jesus restored Peter after Peter had denied him 3 times in the courtyard of Caiaphas. Christian tours will generally take communion here, as when Jesus restored Peter, he'd prepared a table for them to eat. Thus this place is also called Mensa Christi, the table of Christ. First mentioned in the year 808, are the 12 thrones, a series of heart-shaped stones which were placed along the shore to commemorate the words of Jesus to the 12 apostles in Luke 22:29. The church survived longer than any other in the area, almost 1,000 years before finally being destroyed by the Muslims in 1263. The present Franciscan chapel, built on the site in 1933, using parts of the original 4th century walls. For Christians, it's another excellent place to sit and reflect, overlooking what has to be one of the most emotive sites in Israel, where Jesus walked and taught his followers to love one another, to love our neighbors, and walk in peace. A great pity more people have not embraced his teaching. Significant about the restoration is that Jesus made a fire of coals, something the Romans did at that time, and which must surely have reminded Peter of the courtyard of Caiaphas, when he was warming his hands on a fire of coals and denied Jesus. Note that Jesus did not heap coals of fire on Peter's head, but rather took him back to the place of his failure and communicated his love, forgiveness, acceptance, and restoration, thus exhibiting the merciful nature of the true God. Love your enemies, not kill them. Thus, this is truly a place of love and peace. From there we travel to the nearby Mount of Beatitudes, the place where Jesus delivered his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. The actual location of it is uncertain, but this site has been recognized as the site for more than 1,600 years. It's a spectacular location overlooking Galilee. The present Roman Catholic Franciscan chapel, built in 1937 and 38, is elegant and attractive, the 8 sides of the church representing the 8 Beatitudes. It was designed by Italian architect Antonio Baluzzi and partly financed by the Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. Fascinating. Designed by a saint and paid for by a devil. I noted the outside cloisters numbered 9 on each side and 7 at the entrance, 3 sets of 3 at the front. And I guess there's some kind of symbolism in the design. 9, the number of the graces, gifts, and fruits of the Spirit. Perhaps 3, the Trinity. And the number 7, the perfect number. Quite apart from its historical location and spiritual significance is its splendid views. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We thoroughly enjoyed our brief interlude here. So on to Capernaum. If you visit here, you'll be immediately informed that this is the town of Jesus, though Capernaum in Hebrew means the village of Nahum, not the prophet, probably named for a contented fisherman. The ancient synagogue still stands amid the ruins of ancient houses. Matthew tells us Jesus lived here and made it the base for his ministry. It was a fishing village with a population of around 1,500 and the home of the fishermen Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Matthew, who also lived here, writes about it in his Gospel. Now when Jesus heard that John the Baptist had been put in prison, he departed to Galilee, and leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is by the sea. Archaeological artifacts litter the site, what remains of houses and maybe civic buildings. Even intricate sculpted designs and columns. Household vessels. Even Corinthian columns with Jewish images. This artifact, believed to depict the cart that carried the Ark of the Covenant. This column, paid for by Alphaeus, the son of Zebedee, the son of John. Excavations have revealed two ancient synagogues, built one over the other. The first probably here when Jesus lived here. Around the year 129, Roman Emperor Hadrian renamed Israel Palestine after the Philistines, who were the enemies of the Jews. And later, with the growth of Christianity, many churches were built here. The synagogue was an important part of life. Clearly an imposing building. Stone benches were set along the eastern and western aisles. Luke 7 in the Bible tells us that on one occasion when Jesus entered Capernaum, that a centurion's servant was sick and ready to die. The people begged Jesus to come, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. That synagogue was replaced by this one. Nearby are the ruins of the houses, one of which was turned into a church by the Byzantines and is believed to have been built over the home of Peter. To this day, the places where homes were and the alleys between them can clearly be seen, right next to the lake where the disciples fished, where Jesus walked, where he lived, and where many miracles were done. So Peter's house, where the paralyzed man was let down through the roof, now has a building built over the site. I have to say, I felt the modern building ruined the ruins. If ruins can be ruined, that is. It was much better without it. Underneath is the octagonal Byzantine church. But it's time to move on. We will now drive to the other side of Galilee to have lunch in the delightful Negev kibbutz and then visit Kursi. It's about 25 kilometers and takes about 25 minutes, following the eastern shore of Galilee and getting some beautiful views over the lake. I've eaten here before, and a meal in the sunshine overlooking Galilee is memorable. I even had dinner here and watched the sunset over Galilee, which is spectacular. On that occasion, celebrating the 80th birthday of Aviv, a friend who lived here many years and was my guide on that day. The kibbutz has an excellent seafood restaurant and is involved in fishing, dairy farming, and has a banana plantation. Nowadays, in a peaceful, idyllic setting. We then visited Cursi, the biblical land of the Gadarenes, the traditional site of Jesus' miraculous restoration of two demon-possessed men when their demons were sent into a herd of pigs. So it was a Gentile area, as Jews would not keep pigs. The monastery and its church were built in the 5th century, remaining in use until the 15th century. In 614, the Sasanian, Iranian armies invaded Palestine, destroying most of its churches and monasteries, including this one. The church was later rebuilt and even continued to function under Muslim rule after the Arab conquest of Palestine in 638. But then in 749 it was destroyed by an earthquake. Later Arab squatters used the ruins as dwellings. An interesting historic location. We then visited a spectacular lookout in the Golan Heights named Peace Vista, affording a unique view of the Sea of Galilee. It really is an awesome view, and an excellent place to stand and take in the scene before us. In the distance on the shore, Tiberius and Capernaum. Below, Negev, that we've just visited. Our next stop was another special place, Yardenit, the traditional site of the baptism of Jesus, though scholars have disputed this, favoring a site on the east bank of the Jordan farther south. When John the Baptist baptized Jesus, a voice from heaven declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Hundreds heard it, God's own testimony. Waking up as the sun rises for another special day in Galilee. or in Cana, the location of the first miraculous sign of Jesus. For Christians, this is a very special occasion. I'll try to explain. The Gospel of John clearly saying this was not just a miracle, but a sign. What is the important sign that Jesus gave when he began his ministry here? He heralded in a new covenant. The old covenant demanded cleansing by water. There stood the symbols of it, 6 water pots of stone, used for the Jewish rites of purification. The new way was by the blood of Christ. He changed the water into wine to show there would be, after his hour had come, his crucifixion, a new and complete way to be cleansed. The wedding day was considered a day of forgiveness. The bridegroom shares the wine of the cup of blessing with his bride, that she may be pure. Is that what was in the mind of Jesus when he began the task for which he came? The church is said to be the bride of Christ. He loved her and came to cleanse her. This is where it all began. Thus, a very significant occasion. Our next destination is Mount Carmel, where Elijah challenged 450 prophets of Baal to a contest to determine whose deity was the true God. Stretching before us the legendary plain of Armageddon, site of the last battle on earth, Megiddo in the distance, below the brook Kishon, where Elijah slaughtered the prophets of Baal, and where Deborah and Barak won a great victory. Now the road below is a main thoroughfare. Next stop, another significant Christian site. None other than Nazareth, the place of the branch. The young Jesus returned from Egypt and settled in Nazareth. Matthew states that Jesus' coming here fulfilled a messianic prophecy, which he quotes. He will be called a Nazarene. However, no such clear prophecy is found in the Old Testament. Enigmatic, to say the least. My view is that Nazareth is derived from one of the Hebrew words for branch, that alludes to the prophetic messianic words of Isaiah 11:1. From Jesse's roots, a branch will spring forth. Zechariah asks us to behold the man whose name is the branch. Maybe one of these prophecies is what Matthew had in mind. Nazareth today is the largest city in northern Israel and known as the Arab capital of Israel, and is a Christian place of pilgrimage. We are making our way to visit the synagogue church, built on the location of the ancient synagogue to which Jesus returned and read the words of Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. On the outskirts of Old Nazareth, the Nazareth village is built on ancient farmland, complete with museum, artifacts, and a real-life exhibit of what life may have looked like at the time of Jesus. Local people play the parts of people of that day. The shepherds are actually taking care of the sheep, though dressed as shepherds would have dressed. The temporary fold, like shepherds built in the fields to protect the sheep at night. The ancient watchtower, an example of stony ground. A threshing floor where the farmer would have threshed the barley. An ancient wine press where the grapes would be trampled. Also a workshop like that where Joseph would have worked as a tecton, a carpenter or builder. Also exhibits show how wool was spun and dyed. How a home would have looked. The construction of a roof, helpful for us to imagine some of the things that took place in the Bible. A ladder allowing access to the roof. Implements of daily life. A fireplace. Water pots, an oil lamp, a wineskin, the oil press was very important. The olives are first mashed, crushed, sometimes by hand, sometimes a mule would be employed attached to this crusher, and then the mash was pressed to get the olive oil. The first pressing being the best, the final pressing being used for fuel. The oil was then stored in jars. So here's what a house looked like. Pomegranates nearby, perhaps. An excellent place to get insight into life here 2,000 years ago. Tomorrow, a boat trip on Galilee. I love boats. After a great breakfast, we now literally embark on the next episode of our Holy Land experience. We'll cruise where Jesus walked. We're setting out from Tiberius. A kingfisher looks on. Normally, Galilee is 700 feet below sea level, but because of the drought, it's now 715 feet below. I have to say it's a great feeling as we slowly sail out, 1,000 thoughts filling my mind. I was enjoying the moment and wondering how such a calm and pleasant sea could suddenly be the stormy cauldron that inspired poets and artists and scared the disciples to death. In some ways, our lives are mirrored by Galilee, sometimes still and calm, at other times stormy and fearful. And perhaps we too find ourselves asking Jesus to wake up and calm things down a little. Passing the Ron Beach Hotel, fortunately not rough today, and we all quietly enjoy the moment. The calming of the sea is the Bible story that is usually read as we reach the heart of the lake. Merv does the honors, and our imaginations run wild. The surrounding hills, unchanged in 2,000 years. A sublime moment. We're making our way up the western shoreline of Galilee to visit a relic discovered in 1986, a 2,000-year-old fishing boat. This is going to be interesting. Clearly, it's popular with tourists. A grey heron nearby looking for lunch. The ancient boat, also known as the Jesus boat, is a fishing boat dating back to the 1st century AD, discovered in 1986 on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. It's in remarkable shape to say it's so old. 27 feet long, about 8 meters, 7.5 feet wide, 2.3 meters, and a height of 4.3 feet, 1.3 meters. It was discovered during a drought when the waters receded. Of course, there is no specific evidence connecting the boat to Jesus or his disciples, but it does show us what a boat of that time would have looked like. Strangely, the shores of Galilee are largely untouched since the time of Jesus. Even some stone relics. We then visited Tiberius to have a look around during the daytime. The tomb of Maimonides, who died in Egypt in 1204, is here and has made it one of the most important Jewish pilgrimage sites in Israel. It's an interesting place to stroll around. An old mosque is here, next to one of the new hotels that have been built in recent times. Clearly the lake is suffering in the drought. The old Jordan River Hotel has changed its name twice already. I stayed there in the 90s. We strolled along the shore. I was surprised to see large numbers of catfish. I had heard that the tilapia, St. Peter's fish, is now rare here. It can be found in restaurants, but probably did not come from the Galilee. This is a night heron looking for lunch. The catfish eat pita bread. The night heron uses it as bait. Will he be lucky?
Catch him spearing one.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
I might have got that.
We have enjoyed a really great day. But our odyssey is coming to an end. What a superb experience we've had. It seems a long time since we arrived in Tel Aviv and traversed the Negev, the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, Masada, Jerusalem, and now Galilee. I pray for a peaceful future where all inhabitants can live here together in harmony. When Abraham sacrificed the lamb that God provided on Moriah, he did it for everybody, Jew, Christian, Muslim, and everybody else. We will never have peace until we all understand what that meant.